John Rosso, you
EB Moss.
you kind of changed my life, you know.
Come on now,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, yeah. You did. Back in, I don't know what year it was, but you pulled me back into my first love of radio. Remember that day?
I do remember, but I actually thought you were going to go to the day when we first met. I remember it being an industry thing of some sort. It was somewhere on the Upper West Side here in Manhattan, and I remember sort of almost sitting in a bowl of potato salad or something like that, and you sort of kept me from backing into that and literally sitting in the bowl of potato salad on the buffet.
You
So
know, it's how I
thank you for
roll.
that. Yes, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And you've had my back in multiple ways
And
since then
that's why you
before.
hired me back at what was Citadel. I think you owed me or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, Citadel Media.
Yeah, but seriously, that was a wonderful experience. I'm forever grateful. You for the potato salad, me for getting me back into my beloved career of audio. You were the president of Citadel Media, and then you moved on to Triton. A worthy stat from one of your reports, I think, recently was that there are actually like 5 million podcasts globally. Which adds up to something like 70 million episodes, of which you are number 20 in season 2 of Insider Interviews. Just saying.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. And I think this one will be your highest rated ever.
I think so too. So, for the record, hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is Insider Interviews, where you get the insider's scoop on the business of media, marketing, and advertising. And this is episode 20 of season 2, and I am speaking with John Rosso, the CEO of Triton Digital. Back then, you were the president of Citadel Media.
Actually, the sequence of events was ABC Radio Networks, which had been owned by the Walt Disney Company. Disney sold the radio division, which included ABC Radio Networks, to Citadel. Even though we were Citadel Media at that time, we still operated under the brand of ABC Radio Networks for a number of years. And then Citadel was acquired by Cumulus a number of years later. And then Cumulus acquired Westwood One and other bits and pieces. And what you know as Westwood One now includes the old ABC Radio Networks business.
Thank you, because, you know, everything is all about consolidation, conglomeration, so that all makes sense to some degree. But the fact is that you have prevailed through it all.
Prevailed might be too strong a word, but yeah, I've been in and around the audio business since really since wow. I have worked in the radio and audio business really my entire adult professional life.
Yeah.
I worked one day in the television business and learned that it probably wasn't for me.
Well, the audio world is better for it. You are and were a terrific boss and CEO, and I know that you're really proud of where you are now, and because the audio world has gotten a little bit confusing. You can tell from our little tee up here. But what's even more confusing to me is what Triton Digital does. I know your
Sure.
mission overall is to make audio better and tomorrow's audio possible, which is a grand statement. But how do you describe it in kindergarten terms?
Sure, sure. I think of Triton as the technical infrastructure for the online audio industry. We have products that fall into really 3 verticals. So the first is content management. Think about podcast hosting and publishing, distribution, the live streaming of broadcast radio online, music services, that sort of thing. So that's our content distribution or content management vertical. The second one is advertising technology, so a publisher side ad server for both streaming and podcasting, and a programmatic marketplace that allows our publishers access to demand coming from about 40 of the DSPs in the industry. And then the third vertical is audience measurement, so the measurement of streaming, which is the thing, interestingly, that Triton is really most broadly known for, I guess, because we've been putting out these streaming rankers every month for, probably 13 or 14 years at this point. And more recently, we've gotten into the measurement of the podcast industry with not just our podcast rankers, which are country specific, but also a really novel and unique approach to doing audience attribution for podcasting. So if you want to not just know how many listeners or how many downloads your podcast has, but you want to go a layer deeper, much deeper, and understand the demography, the socioeconomics, the behaviors and intents of your audience, we have a product that does that. And again, it's a very unique approach or novel approach where we marry up our census level information around podcast downloads with a statistically representative survey that we conduct in the countries where we're live with that product. So really, again, Triton, technical infrastructure for the audio industry, content management, advertising technology, and audience measurement.
And your role is working across all three buckets?
As the CEO of the company, I'm sort of responsible for making sure all three of those things are delivering on their promise. They do. We're very, very proud of all the products that we've got. There are, different things drive growth at different times in their life cycle, but we're very, very pleased with each of our lines of business.
Well, there have been quite a few evolutions, and through it all, I really think that Triton has had its finger on the pulse. The evidence being what you just described in terms of your enhanced research and reporting in an area that's burgeoning, podcasting. But let's go back to some of the early days, because one of the things that you did was you kind of pioneered digital ad insertion, being able to insert ads in streamed content, and then also programmatic audio advertising in 2013. Those
Sure.
were real game changers. Can you talk about the sort of genesis of those and what's
Sure.
happening today?
So, think back to the early days of streaming media on the internet. I might give away my age when I start talking about some of these things, but I literally remember, driving around in Seattle listening to a Chicago Bulls game on a laptop, back before the Earth's surface cooled, and just being, mesmerized by the fact that I could do that. And then some short number of years thereafter, when broadcast radio started streaming online quite aggressively, one of the big problems was you couldn't stream the audio commercials. And the history of that goes back to the AFTRA contract, the talent contract, and what rights the agencies had to repurpose those voiceovers on the internet, and it was just easier to not put those ads online. So you would listen to your streaming radio station, and it would be a rock station, and then the commercial break would come along, and you'd hear four minutes of classical music. Presumably royalty-free classical music because the composer's been dead 400 years, right? And that was not only a bad user experience, but it was just a really missed commercial opportunity. So Triton was, I will claim to be the company, actually, it was Ando Media, which is a company that Triton had invested in and eventually acquired, that really invented the insertion, the dynamic insertion of audio commercials in those streams. I actually believe that they invented server-side ad insertion broadly, not just for audio, but for anything. And nobody's challenged that yet. Maybe somebody will, but nobody's challenged that yet. So I will make the claim that we invented that server-side dynamic ad insertion.
Okay.
But that unlocked a lot of value for radio in their streams, because suddenly there was a whole new commercial payload that was discovered, and the challenge at that time was that no one knew how to sell it, and there wasn't enough scale to sell it locally. So really, the only play was a national play. But eventually, that business gained traction, and today, that streaming audio inventory is a huge contributor to revenue for our broadcast customers. A typical radio station in the United States has somewhere between 10 and 20% of its listening happening online. So that inventory is incredibly important, and in a lot of cases, it's sold differently, and now sold typically at a higher price point than the broadcast inventory.
And so we've mentioned in this, few sentences, we've mentioned podcasting, we've mentioned
Yeah.
digital radio, if you will, broadcast radio, but really Triton is audio platform agnostic. Yes?
That's right. We have broadcast, radio companies that are publishers. We have a lot of podcast companies that are publishers on our network. We have, quite a number of mobile gaming companies that have audio ad units in them as part of their monetization strategy. We've got, retail media operations that we used to call it, in-store or store casting, think,
Right.
speakers on top of gas pumps or in the ceilings of convenience stores. So we've got a whole broad range of audio publishers under the tent here at Triton. And that's not just in the United States, but really around the world. We're doing business today with almost 2,000 clients in 88 countries.
Amazing.
So we're working in a lot of places.
Do you get to travel?
I get to, but I don't so much. As I used to a lot more. Pandemic times I think reset things for all of us, and we got used to things happening more like this.
Yes.
Virtual connection, and I think this is true of just about all B2B companies. We don't travel to see our customers in their offices the way we used to, mainly because they don't want to see us there. They're probably not even going to their offices anymore, and they don't want you coming, and sitting at their kitchen table. So there's less travel to a customer's or a client's place of business, but what that has done is it's shifted the attention really to the conference business, right? And all of those conferences now are that much more important because that really is the only face-to-face opportunity that we get to be with our clients and our prospects. So really just makes all of those opportunities all the more important.
It's true. And the last time I saw you, although we live near each other in New York City, was I had to go to Los Angeles to Podcast Movement Evolutions to see you. But you were also recently at the NAB, and one of the things that was a hot topic there was the monetization of digital audio on the local level. So let's take it down from the international to the local level, and then I want to move into what's happening with podcasting.
Sure.
How is Triton helping monetization in that level, and what are some of the trends you're seeing?
So let me call back for a moment to what I said a few minutes ago about how when the streaming audio industry emerged, it really was a national only medium. And that's because there wasn't enough scale for anybody to effectively monetize it locally. And that's really changed now. I mean, there is enough scale. And when you look at the concentration of audiences to streaming audio and how a lot of that comes from the radio companies, there's certainly enough scale and opportunity there for them to sell that locally now. These companies have different strategies for how they sell it and how they might package it with their broadcast properties or sell it separately. But it is really one of the main drivers of revenue growth in the radio industry, certainly. The digital part is the part that's driving the growth. And it's also a key contributor to the overall growth of audio as a medium. So real opportunities locally. And what we're seeing is, the programmatic business, which has sort of been a really important sort of a secondary and indirect source of revenue, now is actually moving into a primary position frequently as we see clients doing programmatic guaranteed deals, with local advertisers. And it's sort of a new way of executing the campaign. There's still a buyer, there's still a seller, there are still humans involved in conducting the transaction, but then ultimately they may actually execute the campaign through a programmatic channel using PG. So really interesting to see the evolution of the business. And we've got a pretty broad view of the inventory in the space because so much of it runs through Triton's infrastructure. We're actually seeing real scarcity, at least in the streaming side of the business, which is sort of interesting. And as you would expect, that's causing rates to be bid up, right? So the value of that inventory has gone up pretty significantly over the last couple of years. And by the way, one of the things, just to follow up on that.
Are we still seeing that friction, do you think, on that more local or regional level of media buyers not understanding how to buy local or digital audio?
The purchase of audio in the programmatic channel is a widespread behavior at this point. There is not a major DSP that does not support audio at this point and really embrace it as well. So I don't think there are any barriers to buying digital audio. I think the broadcast side of the business, putting my radio guy hat back on for a minute, I think that there are some interesting transitions happening in the broadcast side of the business as the radio buying groups within the agencies are starting to dissolve in one way or another, and that money goes back into a broader pool. Now broadcast radio is finding new ways to transact with that new generation of buyers, and one of those ways is a project that we've been working on at Triton, which is connecting the broadcast radio, like linear broadcast over-the-air radio spots, into that programmatic ecosystem. We had announced last year a partnership with Basis, a DSP, to bring programmatic guaranteed audio, broadcast audio, to their platform. And then we announced back in January that we were doing something similar, but also adding open market capabilities with Magnite's Clearline platform, which is launching right about now. So we're very excited to be bringing, this linear over-the-air radio inventory to a whole new set of potential buyers and putting it in a place where they can consider it for the first time.
So that speaks to kind of what we talked about at the beginning, your kind of forward-thinking nature of the company. There were a couple of other acquisitions that were made recently, because as we look at all of this content that's available, there are concerns about brand safety and the whole issue of wanting to be in context and proper content. So your parent company, iHeartMedia, had done some work with a company called Sounder to kind of solve for that last year. And then Triton went ahead and bought Sounder. What does it do, and how is that helping us with contextual ad buying and safety?
Sure. So Sounder specializes in really analyzing podcasts in particular and getting an understanding of the content. So, being able to not just transcribe the content, but also understand at a deeper level what the content, what they're talking about, right? And this is important for a couple of reasons. You mentioned brand safety. That's a phrase that I'm not all that comfortable with, because I think of it more like brand suitability. Right? I think safety is sort of in the eye of the the beholder, or the ear of the listener, right? So it really is this content suitable for your brand or not? And there's a whole taxonomy that the IAB has released around different categories, and that's a standard thing, and we support that. But really, ultimately, more importantly, and the larger opportunity is around contextual targeting. And when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned if I want my ad campaign to run adjacent to New York Knicks, content, historically I would have to buy, New York Knicks podcasts or basketball podcasts or sports podcasts, right? Depending on how big a net I had to cast in order to scale my campaign. Because there are probably only so many New York Knicks podcasts, and there are only so many basketball podcasts, and there are only so many sports podcasts. So you have to sort of keep broadening that aperture in order to scale your campaign. Well, with the ability to target contextually against the actual content of the show, not the genre, not the title, right? Not the way the show itself is categorized, but target against the content of the show. You and I could have a podcast about gardening or potato salad, and go off on a tangent about the New York Knicks. Well, now there's an adjacency opportunity there, right, that I can target against. So we have that capability now live with a small group of our publishers, and we're about to roll it out across our whole network pretty soon. And I think that's really, really exciting, because that's an opportunity for a buyer to scale a campaign very easily across potentially thousands and thousands of shows. And as you know, the podcasting business is so fragmented. There are very few single show transactions going on out there. Typically, campaigns run across many, 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 many hundreds of
Right.
shows. So this is a way to enable that.
Well, a worthy stat from one of your reports, I think, recently was that there are actually like 5 million podcasts globally, which adds up to something like 70 million episodes,
Yeah.
of which you are number 20 in season 2 of Insider Interviews. Just saying.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. And I think this one will be your highest rated ever.
I think so too.
No, this has nothing to do with the fact that Triton actually measures these things. And I had no way have a thumb on that scale.
Okay. So there is the technical evolution. There's also the personal evolution too. I mean, we're seeing everything like voice assistants, and if I say her name, she will respond. So my
Yeah.
voice assistant shall remain nameless right now.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the things that are new and next, because I really don't want anybody taking my place as an interviewer.
Right.
I know that there's a lot of voiceover jobs that are already being done synthetically. Help.
It's actually a really interesting development, how high quality some of those synthetic voices have become. And I have to, imagine that a year from now, it'll be, even an order of magnitude better. So, there's certainly some opportunity there and some danger.
Yes.
Right? I think the opportunity is I need 10,000 versions of this particular ad, and because I want them all, sort of downstream customized for different things, whether it's because it should be a little bit different based on, weather or location or who the, listener is.
Right.
So I think that's one of the commercial opportunities in the audio business is to automate that sort of, we used to call it copy splitting
Right.
back in the day, right? But obviously the ability to computer generate a voice that is trained on and ultimately sounds like an actual human being, it's a little scary.
Yeah.
Because that's a powerful thing that can be used for really evil purposes. So that's, sort of beyond our business, but really the ability for, artificial intelligence tools to impersonate an actual human being is scary.
Although you're in 88 countries, and I know you pride yourself on being a very inclusive company. So in a way, this is also kind of breaking down barriers to communication, if you think of it that way too. So
It's interesting. We released a training video not too long ago. It was hosted by one of our folks, Nathan Venezia, who's based in Paris, and he's a native French speaker who also speaks English, and he did a training video that I heard, and it was in Spanish.
okay.
And it was essentially translated using AI tools, and actually the quality was remarkably good, and it sounded just like him.
Wow.
So I guess that's one of the pluses. Maybe someday we get to that sort of, universal translator idea, and suddenly communication is enabled, right?
Right.
But again, the other side of that coin is, you can make synthetic Nathan say whatever you want him to say.
Right. Well, I have said some interesting things when I was in Paris because I don't speak French, and I continually annoyed people by asking for the war instead of the station.
That's right. Yes. Very close.
Okay. But that's why, God made Google Translate now, and you can just speak into it. And another one of those little areas, YouTube, is also breaking down some barriers, this time between podcasting and where we listen to or discover things. Plus, I know that YouTube also just got categorized as CTV. So now it's all things to all people. What do you think about it as a podcasting medium?
That's very interesting. So YouTube is certainly an important way in which some people are consuming, discovering and consuming podcast content, or the content we think of as podcasts. When I consume podcasts, and I use the word consume in that sentence very specifically because, when I consume a podcast, I listen to a podcast, right? Usually it is in this position with these things, in my ears. And I'm doing something else, sitting in a taxi or, on the subway or, walking down the street, whatever. So for me, it's the medium that I consume while I'm doing something else typically, right? Even though maybe one of the thing I'm doing while I'm multitasking in some way, it also is remarkably direct and intimate because it's sort of piped directly into your head. And again, putting my radio guy hat back on, that was always sort of one of the things about radio as an advertising medium that was so compelling. We used to call it theater of the mind,
Yes.
right? Which was the ability with really good copy to paint a mental picture that was far more vivid and powerful than any real picture could be, right? And I think podcasting still, has that DNA. And listening to a podcast is a very personal experience, and again, it's sort of wired directly to your brain. I'm not so sure that when you watch a YouTube video, either on a screen this big on your phone, or even kind of leaned back and seeing it on a laptop or something, has the same kind of connection. In fact, I'm sure it doesn't.
Right.
It's a different experience, and to your point, it's now thought of a little bit more like CTV and not audio advertising. So potentially scratches a different advertiser itch than the podcasting audio does. So I think there's a place for both, for sure. As a measurement company, one of the things we're struggling with a little bit is trying to match up those things. So if you have, EB's audio podcast, and then you have a video version of that that's sort of a one-for-one match, okay, I think that's the same content, just one's video, one is only audio. But what if you create a podcast and then you excerpt 10 minutes of it in video? Is that the same thing? Probably not. So we're trying to figure out how to sort of map the YouTube podcast video world to the podcast audio world as a measurement company, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and as a content creator, I get very confused by best practices as well. So now YouTube has enabled the ability to have your podcast automatically imported based on its RSS feed, your ability to subscribe to and follow a particular show. But what it does is it pulls in the audio version with just a static image. And what I've been doing is duplicating that, as you said. So, for example, little shout out to my other podcast called It's Quite a Living. I did an audio interview only with a musician friend of mine, and I spent all this time creating a video version. And because I had it on automatic import to YouTube, I now have two shows there with the same title. So very confusing, but as you said, discoverability is still really, really high for new podcasts on YouTube.
Well, yeah, and that's really sort of the power of YouTube, is the fact that it surfaces for you the content that it thinks you will like, and podcasting can leverage that. I think it's really effective at that. So perhaps one of the main applications for YouTube in our podcasting space is the ability to promote podcasting. And this may be a great way to drive subscription back to the audio channel for these podcasts.
Got it. Yeah. So you become aware, and then you just want to be able to listen to it on your own terms, and so subscribe.
Yeah, it's kind of the take it with you effect, right? Sure. Or I can't be focusing on the little screen because I'm, mowing the lawn or, driving my car or whatever, but I sure can listen to this.
Yeah. Now that we might be diluted across platforms, there might be synthetic voice, there might be visuals with it. There is our beloved listen to the intimacy. What are best practices for advertisers these days? There's the school of thought of host-read ads really have to prevail.
Sure.
There is awareness building. There is the historical direct response approach to things.
Yeah.
How does an advertiser wrap his or her head around how to wrangle audio?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. I don't know that the medium has to be, pigeonholed into any one area. Certainly the host-read format in podcasting is very effective, right? But the endorsement ad in audio has existed for a really long time, long before podcasting as a medium, right?
Yeah.
There were people doing live reads on the radio because we knew that had sort of a special ability to drive behaviors and affect outcomes, right? So that certainly is true in the podcasting world, but there is a place for the dynamically inserted ad, and you might be dynamically inserting that host-read ad, by the way. And there's certainly a place for the programmatic business, which, would I think struggle more trying, to support the endorsement model, but certainly supports the other ad types that flow through. And I think there's a place for all of those. And again, for a third time, putting my radio guy hat back on, all of those engagement types in advertising have existed historically over on the radio side of the business. Your live endorsements, you had your network radio and national campaigns, you had local direct stuff. You had the guy that owns the furniture store on the corner, doing his own ad, for better or worse, right?
Usually worse, but yeah, I gotta get out.
That's right.
So, one tech and one personal question. Now that we've talked about all of these different areas, how would you describe what Triton really is trying to solve for, and what do you wish you could grease the skids to really solve for? What's the hardest thing you're working on?
Sure. I will say the most interesting and probably also the hardest thing we're working on is trying to bring that linear broadcast inventory into the digital buying ecosystem to allow a buyer to scale a campaign across all audio types, right? Streaming, podcasting, and now linear over the air. And that involves not just the ability to execute a transaction, but also having audiences that you can apply across all three of these channels. So that is really the most interesting work I think we're doing today, and certainly the most gratifying as we see this all starting to come to life now and starting to work. Really, really gratifying after a long time of hard work to get here. So that part is really great. The other thing that we're working on that I think is really extraordinary is the audience attribution for podcasting. Podcasting, the content's great, but a lot of the consumption happens on devices that don't give us a lot of information about who is doing the consuming, right? So we have to use other methods to understand the audience, and Triton's Podcast Metrics Demos Plus service really is an extraordinary data set that shows across a couple of hundred different dimensions the characteristics of the audience to even relatively small podcasts.
Awesome. And I happen to have learned that business podcasts are now one of the fastest growing genres. Yay.
That's good.
But there's business and then there's personal. So as promised or threatened, I always like to talk about purpose-driven opportunities. I know that, back in the day with my radio hat on, radio was known as the place for public service announcements and what you'd turn to in midst of a crisis. So I have to ask two things. Were you in New York during our big earthquake? She said, coming from California.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I was. Yes, I was sitting at my desk for the big earthquake.
Did you know what it was?
And well, it was my first. So
grasshopper.
Yeah, I figured out within a few seconds that must be what was happening.
Yeah.
And then my phone started ringing and texts, blowing up from family who were located in different parts of New York City and other people saying, was that an earthquake? And it's really interesting. You mentioned that radio was the place that people would go to really, for the immediacy of it. Even television, even live TV, especially local television, cannot get on the air really, really instantaneously when something like that earthquake happens. But, immediately it was on the radio. And because Triton measures streaming, of course, I geeked out a little bit and started looking into our data set and saw that, the news stations here in New York City, the online listening to those stations actually went up by about a factor of 8 or 10 times
Wow.
in the course of just a minute or so, right? After that earthquake hit. I mean, literally, the spike was off the screen.
Huh.
So that was really indicative of sort of the place where people went. And it wasn't just because they pushed the button on the radio, in the dashboard of their car, but they went to the live stream as well. And really interesting to see that that's where people turned right away when they were wondering what the heck was that.
Yeah, right. And so I hope that with all of our different sources of audio information that there's still a push to retain public service messaging. But as I teed up before, Triton is a very inclusive company. Are there particular missions that Triton subscribes to for its corporate social responsibility?
So, Triton is a very inclusive organization sort of by accident. I think about, the history of the company. First, Triton is an amalgamation of a lot of acquisitions of different companies from around the world. And we're about 300 people. And
Wow.
Interestingly, a minority of those people are here in the United States. We've got a number of people in Canada, in Quebec and Ontario, and actually even out into Western Canada. And people spread really throughout the world, in Europe with concentrations in the UK and France and Spain and Italy, Serbia now. South Africa, we have an office in Pretoria. We've got a bunch of folks in Melbourne. We've got people in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. I mean, we really are a very international company that probably speaks 60 or 70 languages, here at Triton, which is really, really remarkable.
Hence a use case for that synthetic voice again, too.
Maybe. But the diversity of our team here at Triton, didn't start because we had a particular target. It just kind of happened. Mm-hmm. And I am really, really proud of that diversity and proud of our leaders from all backgrounds.
Yes. And what about you personally, John?
Oh, I don't get out much. So I spend most of my time, thinking about my family, who are awesome but crazy. The rest of it sort of thinking about what's happening here at Triton. I am very, pleased to be involved in sort of spare time with, industry-related causes. Supporting the RAB is one of the. I've been involved with that organization for a really long time, and I think that's a place where, a lot of the industry problems get addressed and solved, and so that is really gratifying.
Well, it's been gratifying speaking with you, and I know you to be an altruistic and empathetic kind of leader, so I'll call that your cause. And
All right.
I really appreciate your time and the tonnage of information that you shared. It was great speaking with you, John Rosso.
Really, really, really a pleasure. So nice to see you, virtually.
Yes.
And again, I know we're neighbors, but we really only ever get in the same room when we're out of town.
It's
so,
true. All right,
nice
we're going to fix
reconnect.
that.
All right.
All right, my friend, take care. Well, I hope you got some good insider scoop from this episode of Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal. And I hope you'll follow Insider Interviews on social media and let me know if you have a question or a suggestion for a next stellar guest in media, marketing, and advertising. Speaking of stellar, my theme music was composed and performed by the incomparable Grammy-winning John Clayton. If I can help you with your company's podcast, please find me at mossappeal.com. Thanks again for listening.